The autumn wind cut through Winona Zimmerman's threadbare shawl as she knelt among the wild brambles, her fingers stained purple and bleeding from thorns, knowing that every berry in her basket meant one more day she might survive the brutal Montana winter that was already breathing frost across the morning grass. She had been alone for 3 months now, ever since her father had succumbed to the fever that swept through their small homestead outside Bannack. Her mother had died giving birth to a stillborn brother when Winona was just 14, and her father had done his best to teach her to survive in this unforgiving territory. But he had never planned to leave her at 21, with winter approaching and their small cabin falling apart around her. The chickens had been taken by foxes. The cow had died of some mysterious ailment, and all she had left were the clothes on her back, a leaking roof, and the knowledge that she needed to preserve enough food to make it through until spring. The berry bushes grew thick along the creek that ran through the valley, about 3 miles from her cabin. Winona had been making the trek every day for 2 weeks, filling her basket, and then returning home to preserve what she could. She had no sugar for jam, so she dried the berries in the weak autumn sun, storing them in cloth sacks that hung from the rafters. It was not much, but it was something. Her father had taught her to trap rabbits and cure the meat, to identify which roots were edible and which would kill her, to read the sky for coming weather. But he had never taught her how to face the loneliness that pressed down on her like a physical weight. She reached deeper into the bramble, ignoring the fresh scratch that opened across her wrist. The berries here were fuller, riper, and she needed every single one. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had eaten nothing but a handful of the berries and some tough jerky for breakfast. She was rationing everything, trying to make her supplies last, but she could feel herself growing weaker each day. The sound of horse hooves on the rocky ground made her freeze. Her first instinct was to hide, but she was too exposed here by the creek. Bandits and drifters were common in this part of Montana territory, and a woman alone was easy prey. She slowly reached for the small knife she kept in her boot, her heart hammering in her chest. "Easy there." The voice was deep, calm, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas or perhaps Oklahoma. "I am not here to cause trouble." Winona turned slowly, her hand still on the knife handle. The man sat astride a large bay horse, his hat pulled low against the sun. He was young, probably not much older than herself, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that were an unusual shade of green. He wore the typical garb of a working cowboy, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a faded blue shirt, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. A 6-shooter hung at his hip, but his hands were relaxed on the saddle horn, nowhere near the weapon. "I did not mean to startle you," he said, swinging down from his horse with easy grace. "I saw you from the ridge and thought you might be in trouble." "I am fine," Winona said, her voice coming out more defensive than she intended. "Just gathering berries." The cowboy's eyes took in her torn dress, her bleeding hands, the basket that was perhaps a quarter full despite her hours of work. His expression shifted into something that looked like concern mixed with pity, and Winona felt her cheeks burn with shame. "Those are good berries," he said, nodding toward her basket. "My mother used to make the best cobbler from them. Course, that was back in Texas before she passed." Winona said nothing, just watched him warily. Men did not approach women alone in the wilderness with good intentions, not usually. But something about this cowboy seemed different. He made no move toward her, just stood there holding his horse's reins, looking at her with those steady green eyes. "Name is Xavier Foster," he said finally. "I work for the Triple Bar Ranch about 10 miles north of here. We have been moving cattle down from the high country before the snow comes." "Winona Zimmerman," she found herself saying, though she had not meant to share her name. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Zimmerman." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both old-fashioned and utterly genuine. "If you do not mind my saying, you look like you could use some help with those berries. There is a patch about a quarter-mile upstream that is thick with them." The cattle have not gotten to it yet. Winona wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him she did not need help from anyone, but the truth was she needed all the help she could get. Winter was coming, and pride would not keep her warm or fed. "I would appreciate that," she said quietly. Xavier smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Well then, let me tie up my horse and we can get to picking." They walked along the creek in silence for a few minutes, Xavier leading his horse behind them. Winona kept glancing at him from the corner of her eye, trying to figure out what he wanted from her. But he just walked, occasionally pointing out a deer track or a hawk circling overhead. When they reached the berry patch he had mentioned, Winona gasped. The bushes were heavy with fruit, more than she had seen in all her weeks of foraging combined. "How did you know about this place?" she asked. "I've been riding this territory for about 2 years now," Xavier said. "You learn where the good spots are. Here, let me help you reach the high ones." For the next 2 hours, they picked berries in companionable silence. Xavier was tall enough to reach the branches Winona could not, and his hands, though large and calloused, moved with surprising gentleness among the thorns. He filled her basket, and then, when it overflowed, he pulled off his bandana and used it as a makeshift sack. Winona watched him, still wary but beginning to relax slightly. He had not made any improper advances, had not even stood too close to her. He just picked berries, occasionally humming a tune under his breath. "That is enough to keep you in pies for a month," Xavier said finally, tying off the bandana and handing it to her. "Where are you staying? I can help you carry these back." Winona hesitated. Letting him know where she lived seemed like a dangerous step. But the basket and the bundle of berries were heavy, and she still had a 3-mile walk ahead of her. "I have a cabin about 3 miles south," she said, "but I can manage." Xavier looked at the sky, where the sun was already beginning its descent toward the western mountains. "It will be dark soon. Let me at least ride you there. You can sit on the horse and I will walk alongside." Every instinct told Winona to refuse, but she was tired and hungry, and the thought of walking 3 miles carrying all those berries made her want to weep. "All right," she said finally. Xavier helped her onto his horse, then handed her the basket and the bundle. He took the reins and began walking south, following her directions. As they traveled, he told her about his work at the Triple Bar, about the hard summer they had bringing cattle to market, about the coming winter that the old-timers said would be brutal. "What about you?" he asked finally. "Are you out here alone?" Winona saw no point in lying. If he wanted to take advantage of her isolation, he would find out soon enough anyway. "My father died 3 months ago. It has just been me since then." Xavier stopped walking and turned to look at her, his expression grave. "That is a hard thing. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Winona said, surprised by the genuine sympathy in his voice. "You have enough supplies for the winter." "Food, firewood, I am managing," Winona said, though they both knew it was a lie. When they reached her cabin, Winona was suddenly, acutely aware of how it must look to him. The roof sagged in the middle, several of the window shutters hung crooked, and the small garden patch was full of dead plants she had not had the energy to clear. It was the home of someone barely surviving, and shame washed over her. But Xavier said nothing about the state of the place. He just helped her down from the horse and carried the basket and bundle to her door. "These should keep well if you dry them," he said. "Spread them out in a single layer if you can, not too close together." "I know," Winona said, more sharply than she intended. "My father taught me." "Of course," Xavier said, not seeming offended. "Well, I should be getting back before full dark." He started to turn away, then stopped. "Miss Zimmerman, I hope you will not think me too forward, but I would like to help you if you will let me. Winter is coming on hard, and nobody should face it alone." "I do not need charity," Winona said, her pride flaring up despite her circumstances. "I am not offering charity," Xavier said quietly. "I am offering friendship. My mother raised me to believe that neighbors help each other, and out here, anyone within 50 miles is a neighbor." Winona wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence, but the thought of facing the long winter completely alone was terrifying. "What kind of help?" she asked cautiously. "Well, for starters, that roof needs fixing before the snow comes, and you could use some firewood laid by. The triple bar has plenty of both materials and men to spare. My boss, Mr. Hendricks, is a fair man. He would not mind me spending some time helping out a neighbor in need." "And what would you want in return?" Winona asked, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at her. Xavier met her eyes steadily. "Nothing you are not willing to give. I just think it is the right thing to do." Winona studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but all she saw was honest concern. "All right," she said finally. "I would be grateful for help with the roof." Xavier's face broke into that transforming smile again. "I will come by tomorrow with some supplies and another pair of hands. We will have it fixed in no time." After he left, Winona carried the berries inside and began spreading them out to dry, using every flat surface she had. She could not remember the last time someone had shown her such kindness without wanting something in return. Her father had always warned her to be suspicious of strangers, especially men, but there had been something in Xavier's eyes that made her want to trust him. That night, she lay in her narrow bed listening to the wind whistle through the gaps in the roof, and for the first time in months, she felt a small flutter of something that might have been hope. Xavier arrived the next morning with another cowboy, a grizzled older man named Henry who had a kind face and gentle manner. They brought wood, nails, tar paper, and enough supplies to completely re-roof the cabin. Winona made coffee from her dwindling supply and watched as the two men worked with efficient coordination. Xavier had removed his shirt in the growing warmth of the day, and Winona found herself noticing the play of muscles across his back and shoulders as he hammered. She looked away quickly, embarrassed by her own thoughts. By mid-afternoon, the roof was solid and waterproof. Henry had also fixed the crooked shutters and replaced a rotted board on the front step. "That should keep the weather out," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I cannot thank you enough," Winona said, and meant it. "I do not know how I can repay you." "No repayment needed," Henry said. "Young Xavier here has been talking about you non-stop since yesterday. Figured the least I could do was help him out." Xavier shot Henry a look that would have curdled milk, and Winona felt a blush creep up her cheeks. Henry just laughed, completely unbothered. After Henry left, Xavier lingered, helping Winona carry water from the creek and split some wood for her stove. "I was serious about what I said yesterday," he told her as he stacked the firewood. "You should not have to face this winter alone. The triple bar has plenty of food, and Mr. Hendricks would not miss a few supplies here and there." "I cannot accept charity," Winona said again, but her protest was weaker this time. "Then do not think of it as charity," Xavier said. "Think of it as neighbors helping each other. When you get back on your feet, you can help someone else." Winona considered this. "There might be another way," she said slowly. "I can sew and mend. If your ranch has any clothes that need repairing, I could do that in exchange for supplies." Xavier's face lit up. "That would be perfect. We have got a bunkhouse full of men who do not know one end of a needle from the other. Their clothes are falling apart. And so began an arrangement that would change both their lives. Every few days, Xavier would ride over with a sack of clothes that needed mending and a basket of supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, salt, dried beans, and occasionally some fresh meat. Winona would work late into the night by lamplight, carefully repairing tiers, replacing buttons, and letting out seams. She took pride in her work, making sure every stitch was perfect. But the real payment came in the hours Xavier spent at her cabin. At first, he would just drop off the supplies and leave, but gradually he began staying longer. He helped her gather more berries, taught her how to set snares for rabbits, and showed her the best places to find edible roots. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their lives. Winona learned that Xavier was 24, that he had left Texas after his mother died, and his father remarried a woman who made it clear there was no place for him in their home. He had drifted north, working various ranches, until he found a place at the Triple Bar. He loved the work, loved the open country, but he was lonely too. "I always thought I would have a family by now," he told her one afternoon as they walked along the creek. "A wife, children, a home of my own. But ranching does not pay much, and most women are not interested in marrying a cowboy with nothing to his name." "I think you are selling yourself short," Winona said. "You are kind and hardworking and honest. Those are qualities that matter more than money." Xavier looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Is that what you think matters in a man?" "Yes," Winona said firmly. "My father always said that a man's character is his true wealth." As the weeks passed and autumn deepened into early winter, Winona found herself looking forward to Xavier's visits more than she wanted to admit. He made her laugh with his stories of ranch life, listened with genuine interest when she talked about her dreams of having a real garden someday, and never made her feel ashamed of her poverty or her circumstances. She caught herself watching for him when his visits were due, her heart lifting at the sound of his horse's hooves. One day in late October, Xavier arrived with his usual delivery, but also with a proposition. "Mr. Hendricks is hosting a barn dance next Saturday," he said. "The whole county is invited. I was hoping you might come with me." Winona's first instinct was to refuse. She had nothing appropriate to wear to a dance, and the thought of being around so many people after months of isolation was overwhelming. But Xavier was looking at her with such hopeful expectation that she found herself nodding. "I would like that," she said. "Really?" Xavier's whole face brightened. "That is wonderful. I will pick you up Saturday evening." After he left, Winona panicked. She had exactly one good dress, the one she had worn to her father's burial, and it was dark gray wool, entirely unsuitable for a dance. She spent the next few days taking apart an old dress of her mother's that had been stored in a trunk, using the fabric to create something new. Her mother had been fond of deep blue, and the color brought out the unusual violet shade of Winona's eyes. She worked by lamplight, her fingers flying over the fabric, creating something that was both modest and flattering. When Xavier arrived on Saturday evening, his eyes widened at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Winona felt herself blush. "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." He did. He wore clean black trousers, a white shirt, and a black vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His hair was neatly combed, and he smelled of soap and leather. The ride to the Triple Bar took about 45 minutes, and Winona spent most of it fighting nervousness. She had not been around people since her father's death, had not danced since before her mother passed. What if she had forgotten how? What if people stared at her homemade dress and worn shoes? But when they arrived at the ranch, Xavier helped her down from the horse with such care and pride that her nervousness eased slightly. The barn had been cleared and decorated with lanterns, and a group of musicians was tuning up in the corner. People were already gathering, ranchers and townspeople, all dressed in their best. "Xavier," a booming voice called out. A large man with a gray beard and kind eyes approached them. "So this is the young lady you have been telling me about." "Mr. Hendricks, this is Miss Winona Zimmerman," Xavier said. "Winona, this is my boss, Robert Hendricks." "Pleased to meet you, miss," Mr. Hendricks said. "Xavier here has been singing your praises. Says you do the finest mending he has ever seen." "I do my best," Winona said quietly. "Well, you are welcome here any time," Mr. Hendricks said warmly. "Any friend of Xavier's is a friend of the Triple Bar." As the evening progressed, Winona found herself relaxing. The people were friendly, and Xavier never left her side. He introduced her to the other ranch hands, to the neighboring ranchers and their families, to the shopkeepers from Bannack. When the music started, he led her onto the dance floor with confidence. "I should warn you, I am not the best dancer," Xavier said as he took her hand. But he was better than he claimed, moving her through the steps with easy grace. Winona had learned to dance from her mother, who had insisted that a lady should know such things, and she found the old steps coming back to her naturally. They danced a reel, a waltz, and several other dances she did not know the names of. Xavier held her carefully, respectfully, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her heart race. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for air. The night was cold but clear, stars scattered across the sky like thrown diamonds. Xavier led her to a bench near the barn, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment. "I am glad you came tonight," Xavier said finally. "I was afraid you might refuse." "I almost did," Winona admitted, "but I am glad I did not. I've had a wonderful time." "Winona," Xavier said, and something in his tone made her turn to look at him. "I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, they have been the best of my life. You are smart and strong and beautiful, and I cannot stop thinking about you." Winona's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected Xavier might have feelings for her, but hearing him say it out loud was different. "I know I do not have much to offer," Xavier continued. "Just a cowboy's wages and a rented room in a bunkhouse, but I am a hard worker and I am saving money. Someday I will have my own place, my own herd. And I would like very much if you would consider letting me court you properly." Winona's mind raced. She had known Xavier for less than 2 months, but in that time he had shown her more kindness and respect than any man except her father. He had helped her without asking for anything in return, had treated her as an equal, had made her laugh when she thought she would never laugh again. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Xavier's smile was like sunrise. He took her hand carefully, as though it were something precious. "You have made me very happy." They sat there for a long time, hands linked, talking about everything and nothing. Xavier told her about his dreams of having his own ranch someday, of raising cattle and horses, of building a life that meant something. Winona shared her own dreams, smaller but no less important, of having a real home, of planting a garden that would feed her through the winter, of never being hungry or cold again. "We could build those dreams together," Xavier said, "if you wanted." "I think I would like that," Winona said, and meant it with her whole heart. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Winona had imagined. Xavier came to see her every chance he got, sometimes riding over after a long day of work just to sit with her for an hour before riding back. He brought her gifts: a warm wool blanket, a book of poetry, a set of hairpins made from polished wood. She mended his clothes and cooked him meals, simple fare made special by the company. As November turned to December and the first serious snows began to fall, Xavier became increasingly concerned about Winona spending the winter alone in her cabin. "It is not safe," he told her one evening as they sat by her stove. "What if you got sick? What if a storm came in and you could not get out for wood?" "I will be fine," Winona insisted, though she too had been having the same worries. "Come stay at the Triple Bar," Xavier said. "Mr. Hendricks and his wife have a big house. I am sure they would give you a room in exchange for help with the cooking and cleaning. You would be warm and safe and fed." Winona was tempted, more than she wanted to admit. But accepting such charity, even in exchange for work, felt like giving up her independence. "I need to think about it," she said. The decision was made for her a week later when a massive blizzard swept through the valley. Winona had been preparing as best she could, but nothing could have prepared her for the fury of that storm. For 3 days, the wind howled and the snow fell so thick she could not see her own hand in front of her face. The cabin shook with every gust, and despite the new roof, snow found its way in through every crack. On the second day, Winona ran out of firewood. She had a small supply stacked inside, but it was not enough. She wrapped herself in every blanket she owned and huddled by the dying fire, praying the storm would pass. By the third day, she was so cold she could barely move, and she began to wonder if this was how she would die, frozen in her father's cabin. The sound of someone pounding on the door seemed like a dream at first. But then she heard Xavier's voice calling her name, frantic and desperate. She managed to stumble to the door and pull it open, and then Xavier was there, covered in snow, pulling her into his arms. "Thank God," he said into her hair. "I have been trying to get to you since the storm started. Are you all right?" "Cold," Winona managed to say through chattering teeth. Xavier quickly assessed the situation. The dead fire, the lack of wood, Winona's frozen state. He wrapped her in his own coat and then set about building up the fire, using wood he had brought with him. When it was blazing, he sat beside her, rubbing her hands and feet to restore circulation. "You are coming back to the ranch with me," he said firmly. No arguments. Winona was too cold and exhausted to argue. Xavier helped her pack a bag with her essential belongings, then wrapped her in blankets and lifted her onto his horse. He climbed up behind her, holding her secure against his chest, and began the slow, difficult journey back to the Triple Bar. The trip that normally took 45 minutes took over 3 hours. The snow was deep and still falling, and Xavier had to guide the horse carefully to avoid hidden obstacles. Winona drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the warmth of Xavier's body and the steady rhythm of the horse's movement. When they finally reached the ranch, Xavier carried her straight to the main house. Mrs. Hendricks, a plump woman with a motherly face, took one look at Winona and immediately took charge. She had Winona stripped of her wet clothes, dressed in a warm nightgown, and tucked into a bed with hot bricks wrapped in cloth at her feet. She brought hot soup and sweet tea and fussed over her like a mother hen. "That young man of yours was beside himself with worry," Mrs. Hendricks said as she smoothed the blankets. "Went out in that storm against all good sense to get to you. You are very lucky to have someone who cares for you that much." Over the next few days, as Winona recovered her strength, she came to understand just how much Xavier did care for her. He checked on her constantly, bringing her meals, reading to her, just sitting with her when she was too tired to talk. Mr. and Mrs. Hendricks treated her like family, making it clear she was welcome to stay as long as she needed. "We could use the help around here," Mrs. Hendricks said when Winona tried to thank her. "I am not getting any younger and this house is too big for me to manage alone. If you wanted to stay on, help with the cooking and cleaning, we would be happy to give you room and board." It was more than Winona could have hoped for. She accepted gratefully, and soon settled into a routine at the Triple Bar. She helped Mrs. Hendricks with the cooking, preparing meals for the ranch hands who ate in the main house. She did laundry and cleaning, mending and sewing. In return, she had a warm room, regular meals, and the company of kind people. But more than that, she had Xavier. They saw each other every day now, sharing meals, talking in the evening after the work was done, stealing moments alone when they could. Xavier courted her properly, with the full knowledge and approval of the Hendricks. He brought her wildflowers that somehow survived the winter, carved her a wooden box for her sewing supplies, taught her to play cards. Christmas came, and with it a celebration at the ranch. Mrs. Hendricks prepared a feast, and the ranch hands gathered in the main house to celebrate. There was music and laughter, good food and better company. Xavier gave Winona a gift, a beautiful shawl in deep blue wool that perfectly matched her dress. "I saved up for it," he said shyly. "I saw it in the general store in Bannack and knew it would look beautiful on you." Winona felt tears prick her eyes. She had made him a gift, too, a shirt she had sewn from fabric Mrs. Hendricks had helped her buy. "I hope it fits," she said as she handed it to him. Xavier tried it on immediately, and it fit perfectly. "It is the finest shirt I have ever owned," he said, and kissed her cheek gently. It was their first kiss, chaste and brief, but it sent warmth flooding through Winona's entire body. She looked up at Xavier and saw her own feelings reflected in his eyes. As winter deepened, their relationship deepened too. They talked about the future more concretely now, making plans. Xavier had been saving money for years, and he had nearly enough to buy his own land. He showed Winona the property he had his eye on, a beautiful valley about 15 miles from the Triple Bar with a creek running through it and good grazing land. "We could build a house there," he said, his arm around her shoulders as they looked out over the snow-covered landscape. "Start our own herd, make a real life." "We?" Winona asked, her heart pounding. Xavier turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Winona, I love you. I think I have loved you since that first day I found you picking berries by the creek. You are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Winona's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Xavier let out a whoop of joy and spun her around, making her laugh. When he set her down, he kissed her properly this time. A kiss full of promise and hope and love. They were married in February, in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Mrs. Hendricks made Winona a dress from white linen, trimmed with lace that had been in her family for generations. Mr. Hendricks walked Winona down the aisle, standing in for the father she had lost. The ranch hands all attended, along with neighbors from the surrounding ranches and some townspeople from Bannack. Xavier stood at the front of the room looking nervous and impossibly handsome in a new black suit. When Winona reached him, he took her hands in his and smiled, and she knew she was making the right choice. The preacher from Bannack performed the ceremony, and they exchanged vows that Winona meant with her whole heart. When Xavier kissed her as his wife, the room erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration that followed was joyous. There was food and music and dancing. Mr. and Mrs. Hendricks gave them a generous gift of money and cattle to start their own herd. The ranch hands contributed tools and supplies. By the end of the night, Winona and Xavier had everything they needed to start their new life together. Mr. Hendricks had given them permission to stay in a small cabin on the ranch property until spring, when they could begin building on their own land. That first night as husband and wife, Xavier carried Winona over the threshold of the little cabin, both of them laughing. "Welcome home, Mrs. Foster," he said, setting her down gently. "Home," Winona repeated, liking the sound of it, They stood in the middle of the small room, suddenly shy with each other despite all the months they had spent together. Xavier reached for her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "I want you to know," he said seriously, "that I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy. I will work hard to provide for you, to give you the life you deserve. You will never be hungry or cold or alone again. That is my promise to you." Winona felt tears spill over. "You have already given me more than I ever dreamed of. You saved my life, Xavier, in every way that matters." They came together then, a kiss that deepened into something more. Xavier was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure Winona felt safe and cherished. That night was everything it should be, tender and sweet and full of love. The winter passed in a haze of happiness. Winona and Xavier settled into married life with ease, each day bringing them closer together. They made plans for their future home, sketching out layouts in the evenings. Xavier wanted a big kitchen where Winona could cook and preserve food, a large front porch where they could sit in the evenings, bedrooms for the children they hoped to have. When spring finally came, melting the snow and turning the valley green, they began building. Mr. Hendricks gave Xavier time off from his ranch duties to work on the house, and many of the ranch hands volunteered to help. The community came together, neighbors helping neighbors, and in the space of 2 months, a sturdy house rose from the Montana earth. It was not large, but it was solid and well built. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen with a good stove, a bedroom, and a loft that could be divided into more rooms later. Xavier had built Winona a large pantry for storing food, remembering her fear of going hungry. The front porch faced east, catching the morning sun. When it was finished, they moved in with the few belongings they had accumulated. Mrs. Hendricks gave them dishes and linens. Mr. Hendricks gave them furniture he had stored in his barn. The ranch hands contributed various useful items: tools, lamps, a rocking chair. On their first night in their own home, Xavier and Winona sat on the front porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. "We did it," Xavier said, pulling her close. "We built a home." "We did," Winona agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "Thank you for giving me this, for giving me everything." "You are my everything," Xavier said simply. The summer was busy. Xavier worked their small herd of cattle, building it slowly but steadily. Winona planted a huge garden, carefully nurturing vegetables and herbs. She also gathered wild berries, remembering how far she had come from that desperate woman picking berries alone. Now she had help, had a partner, had someone to share the load. They worked hard, but they also made time for each other. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and talk, or take walks along the creek where they had first met. On Sundays, they would ride to Bannack for church and to buy supplies, always saving a little time to simply be together. In late summer, Winona realized she was with child. She told Xavier one evening as they sat by the fire, watching the flames dance. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply. Xavier's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she were made of glass. "Truly?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "Truly," Winona confirmed. Xavier laughed and cried at the same time, and Winona found herself doing the same. They held each other for a long time, overwhelmed by the joy and the responsibility of it all. The pregnancy was not easy. Winona was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down. Xavier was patient and attentive, bringing her weak tea and dry bread, holding her hair when she was sick, rubbing her back when she ached. As the baby grew, Winona found it harder to do the physical work of the ranch, but Xavier took on extra tasks without complaint. Mrs. Hendricks became a constant presence, checking on Winona regularly, offering advice and support. "You are doing wonderfully," she would say. "First babies are always the hardest, but you are strong. You will be fine." Winter came again, and with it the memories of the previous year. But how different it was now. Winona sat in her warm house, her hand on her swollen belly, watching snow fall outside the window. She had food in her pantry, wood stacked high for the fire, and a husband who loved her. The contrast to the previous winter was almost overwhelming. The baby came in March, during a late spring snowstorm. Xavier rode to get Mrs. Hendricks and the midwife from Bannack, then paced outside the bedroom door while Winona labored. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when both Winona and the midwife were worried. But finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, a baby's cry filled the house. "You have a son," Mrs. Hendricks announced, opening the bedroom door with a tired but happy smile. Xavier rushed in to find Winona propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up at him with such love that it took his breath away. "Meet your son," she said softly. Xavier approached carefully, as though afraid he might break something. He looked down at the small red face, the tiny fists waving in the air, and felt something shift in his chest. "He is perfect," he whispered. They named him William, after Winona's father. He was a healthy baby with Xavier's green eyes and Winona's dark hair. Xavier was besotted from the first moment, spending hours just watching his son sleep, marveling at the tiny miracle they had created together. Parenthood brought new challenges and new joys. Winona was exhausted from sleepless nights, but she had never been happier. Xavier helped as much as he could, taking the baby in the evenings so Winona could rest, changing diapers, walking the floor when William was fussy. As spring turned to summer, William grew and thrived. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, and he clearly adored his father. Xavier would carry him around the ranch, showing him the cattle, the horses, the wide Montana sky. "Someday this will all be yours," he would tell his son. "Yours and your brothers and sisters. Planning ahead, are you?" Winona teased one evening, watching them from the porch. "I want a house full of children," Xavier said, coming to sit beside her with William in his arms. "If you are agreeable to that." "I am agreeable," Winona said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Very agreeable." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered, and they were able to expand their herd. Winona's garden provided more than enough food for their family, and she began selling the surplus in Bannack. Xavier hired a young ranch hand to help with the work, a quiet boy named Thomas who was grateful for the opportunity. When William was 2, Winona became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to maintain most of her normal routine. Their daughter was born in the autumn, a tiny thing with blonde hair and Xavier's green eyes. They named her Rose, and she completed their family in a way Winona had not known she needed. Xavier was an excellent father, patient and loving with both children. He built them toys, told them stories, taught them about the land and the animals. Winona would often find him in the evening, sitting on the porch with a child on each knee, pointing out constellations in the night sky. "Do you remember," Winona said one such evening, coming to sit beside them, "when we first met? I was so desperate, so scared. I never imagined I could be this happy." Xavier looked at her over the children's heads, his eyes warm with love. "I remember a brave woman picking berries, doing whatever it took to survive. I fell in love with you that very first day." "I think I fell in love with you too," Winona admitted, "though I was too scared to admit it even to myself. You filled my basket and offered me your table, and you gave me so much more than food. You gave me hope. You gave me a future." "We gave each other a future," Xavier corrected. I was just a drifting cowboy before I met you, no purpose, no direction. You gave me a reason to build something, to be something more. The years passed, and their family continued to grow. Another son, James, joined them when Rose was 3. Then 2 years later, twin girls, Emma and Sarah, completed their family. The house that had seemed so spacious when they built, it became cramped with 5 children. So Xavier added on, building more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. The ranch grew too. They had a substantial herd now, and Xavier employed 3 full-time ranch hands. They built a proper barn, a smokehouse, a chicken coop. Winona had her dream garden and then some, with rows of vegetables, herbs, and even some flowers. The pantry Xavier had built for her was always full, a testament to her fear of hunger that never quite went away. The children grew up wild and free, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with ranch chores as soon as they were able. Xavier taught the boys about cattle and horses, while Winona taught the girls to cook and preserve food. But they crossed those lines too, because both Winona and Xavier believed their children should be capable of anything. On Sundays, they would all pile into the wagon and ride to Bannack for church. They were respected members of the community now, known for their hard work and their generosity. When neighbors needed help, Xavier was always there. When someone was sick or had a new baby, Winona would arrive with food and helping hands. "You are paying it forward," Xavier said to her once, watching her prepare a basket for a new mother in town. "I remember what it was like to be alone and desperate," Winona said. "If we can help others avoid that, we should." As the children grew older, they began to understand their parents' story. Winona would tell them about their grandfather Zimmerman, about the hard winter when she was alone, about the cowboy who found her picking berries and changed her life. "What were you most scared of?" William asked one evening. He was 10 now, old enough to understand hardship. "Being alone," Winona answered honestly. "Not having anyone to rely on, not having anyone who cared whether I lived or died. That was the worst part." "But then Father found you," Rose said. She was 8 and had a romantic soul. "Yes, then your father found me," Winona agreed, smiling at Xavier across the room. "And he gave me everything I had lost and more. He gave me a family." "I love you," Xavier mouthed at her, and she mouthed it back. The years turned into decades. The children grew up and began to make their own ways in the world. William took over much of the ranch work, showing a natural aptitude for cattle that made Xavier proud. Rose married a young lawyer from Bannack and moved to town, though she visited often. James became a teacher, educating children in a one-room schoolhouse near the ranch. Emma and Sarah, inseparable as always, opened a dress shop in Bannack that quickly became successful. Xavier and Winona grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had weathered hard times and good times, loss and joy, and through it all they had remained partners in every sense of the word. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, they renewed their vows in the same room where they had first married. "I would do it all again," Xavier said, holding Winona's hands. "Every moment, every hardship, every joy, as long as it was with you." "As would I," Winona said through happy tears. "You are my everything, Xavier Foster. You always have been." They continued to live on the ranch, though as they aged, they passed more and more of the work to William and Thomas, who had become like a son to them. They spent their days in comfortable companionship, sitting on the porch they had sat on for decades, watching the seasons change over the valley. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Winona asked one autumn evening. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray, their faces lined with age and laughter. "Not for a single moment," Xavier said firmly. Every choice I made led me to you. How could I wish that different? Even the hard parts, Winona pressed. The years of struggle, the times we barely had enough, especially the hard parts, Xavier said. They taught us to appreciate what we have. They made us strong. They made us who we are. Winona leaned her head on his shoulder, just as she had done so many times over the years. I love you, she said simply. I love you too, Xavier replied. More than words can say. As they sat there, watching the sun set over the mountains, Winona thought about that desperate woman picking berries so many years ago. She had been so lost, so scared, so alone. She could never have imagined the life that was waiting for her, the love that would transform everything. Xavier had filled her basket with berries that first day, but he had filled her life with so much more. He had given her hope when she had none, companionship when she was alone, love when she thought she would never love again. He had built her a table and invited her to sit at it, and in doing so had given her a home, a family, a future, and she had given him the same. A drifting cowboy with no roots had found a place to belong, a purpose, a reason to build something lasting. Together they had created a legacy that would outlive them both, in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built from nothing, in the love they had shared. Years later, when Winona was 73, she became ill. The doctors from Bannack said there was nothing they could do, that she should make her peace and say her goodbyes. Xavier refused to accept it at first, but Winona was calmer. I have had a good life, she told him, holding his hand as she lay in their bed. A wonderful life, I have no regrets. I am not ready to lose you, Xavier said, and his voice broke on the words. I know, Winona said gently, but you will be all right. You have our children, our grandchildren. You have the ranch. You have a lifetime of memories. Those will sustain you. Nothing can sustain me without you, Xavier said, but Winona just smiled and squeezed his hand. Then come find me when your time comes. I will be waiting. She passed peacefully a few days later, surrounded by her family. Xavier held her hand until the very end, and when she took her last breath, he felt a part of himself go with her. But he honored her memory by living as she would have wanted him to live. He continued to work the ranch, though his heart was no longer fully in it. He spent time with his children and grandchildren, passing on the stories and the values that had defined his and Winona's life together. He sat on the porch every evening, in the spot where they had sat together for so many years, and talked to her, as though she were still there. Xavier lived for another 5 years after Winona passed. On a warm spring evening, sitting in his favorite chair on the porch, he simply did not wake up. The family found him the next morning, a peaceful expression on his face, his hand extended as though reaching for someone. They buried him next to Winona on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large cottonwood tree. The entire community came to pay their respects to the man who had been a pillar of their world. William stood at the grave, his own children around him, and told the story one more time. My father found my mother picking berries by a creek, he said. She was alone and desperate, facing a hard winter with nothing but her courage and determination. He filled her basket and offered her his table, and from that simple act of kindness, all of this grew. A family, a legacy, a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The ranch continued to prosper under William's management, and then under his sons and then his grandsons. The house that Xavier and Winona had built remained the heart of the operation, carefully maintained, a museum of sorts to the love that had built it. The pantry was never allowed to be empty, a tribute to Winona's fear and Xavier's promise that she would never go hungry again. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, people swore they could see 2 figures sitting on that porch, hand in hand, watching the sunset over the Montana mountains. The cowboy and the berry picker, together for eternity, their love story echoing through the generations as a testament to the power of kindness, compassion, and a love that conquered all odds. Their story became legend in the community, told and retold, changing slightly with each telling but always maintaining its essential truth. That sometimes salvation comes in the most unexpected forms, that love can grow from the smallest acts of kindness, and that two people who commit to each other fully and completely can build something that lasts far beyond their own lives. The berry bushes still grew thick along that creek where they first met, and every autumn, members of the Foster family would make a pilgrimage there to pick berries, remembering the woman who had foraged to survive and the man who had stopped to help her. They would fill their baskets to overflowing, just as Xavier had done for Winona that first day, and they would remember that their entire world had grown from that one moment of connection. And in the town of Bannack, Montana, where old-timers still gathered to share stories of the early days, the tale of Xavier Foster and Winona Zimmerman was held up as the finest example of what the West could be at its best. Not a place of violence and hardship, though there was certainly that, but a place where people took care of each other, where community mattered, where love could flourish even in the harshest conditions. Their grandchildren would tell their children, and those children would tell theirs, about the desperate woman picking berries in the autumn cold, about the kind cowboy who stopped to help her, about how he filled her basket and offered his table, and how from that simple beginning grew a love that changed everything. It was a story of hope in hopeless times, of finding light in darkness, of two souls who recognized each other across the divide of their loneliness and chose to build something beautiful together. The ranch still stood, a testament to their legacy, worked now by their great-great-grandchildren who had inherited not just the land but the values that Xavier and Winona had instilled in every generation. Work hard, be kind, take care of your neighbors, and never forget where you came from. The land had prospered under their stewardship, growing from a small homestead to one of the most successful ranches in Montana. But it had never lost the essential character that its founders had given it. In the main house, carefully preserved, was Winona's first berry basket, the one she had been carrying that day Xavier found her. It sat in a place of honor, a reminder of humble beginnings and the unexpected ways that life can change. Next to it was the bandana Xavier had used to carry extra berries, faded now but still carefully kept. And every year, on the anniversary of Xavier and Winona's first meeting, the family would gather at the ranch for a celebration. They would pick berries, cook Winona's recipes, tell the old stories, and remember the love that had started it all. The children would listen wide-eyed to tales of their ancestors, of a time when survival was uncertain and the future was unwritten, when a simple act of kindness had changed the course of so many lives. As the sun set on these gatherings, casting long shadows across the valley that Xavier and Winona had made their home, the family would stand together and raise a toast. To the berry picker and the cowboy, to the courage to accept help when it is offered, to the generosity to offer help when it is needed, to love that transcends hardship and time, to the legacy of two ordinary people who did extraordinary things simply by choosing to be kind, to work hard, and to love each other with their whole hearts. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when their earthly work is done, Xavier and Winona Foster smiled down on the family they had created, the legacy they had built, the love that continued to ripple outward through the generations. They had started with nothing but determination and hope, found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and built something that would last forever. Their story was complete, their lives fully lived, their love eternal. And that, in the end, was everything.